All right, we're going to continue on with our PowerPoint presentation on primate classification. This correlates with Chapter 5 in the Explorations textbook or Chapter 6 in the Essentials textbook. All right, so we just talked about platyrrhines, and that's a good picture of a prehensile tail there. Those are woolly monkeys, and you see that they're using both their hands and their tail to locomote in the trees, to move in the trees. All right, the next infraorder, so we're still under haplorhines, so envision your primate chart. On one side, we've got the platyrrhines and New World monkeys, and on the other side, we have the catarrhines. So the catarrhines will include the Old World monkeys, apes, and humans. This infraorder is both terrestrial and arboreal as far as locomotion goes. Geographically speaking, we find catarrhines in natural habitats in both Africa and Asia. And then envisioning your primate chart again, underneath the catarrhines we'll have two more divisions, two more primary divisions. The Cercopithecoids, which are just the Old World monkeys, and then the Homonoids or Homonoidia, that includes apes and humans. So some examples of primates that are Cercopithecoids, that are Old World monkeys: baboons, macaques, mandrills, geladas, vervet monkeys, guenons, and colobus monkeys. All right, let's talk about the physical characteristics that will define the Cercopithecoids. So all haplorhines will have postorbital closure, meaning there's bony material completely protecting their eye sockets or orbits, and they have anterior-facing orbits, forward-facing eyes. They have forward or down-directed nostrils. Their dental formula is a little bit different than the platyrrhines. They have one less premolar. So when we're dividing the jaw, when we're dividing the mouth into quadrants, if we were looking just at the mandibular teeth, the lower teeth, for example, we would count from the front. So it would be 2 incisors, followed by 1 canine, and then 2 premolars and 3 molars. So dental formula is 2, 1, 2, 3. We actually share that with the Cercopithecoids. So the Cercopithecoids, apes, and humans will all have a dental formula of 2, 1, 2, 3. In comparison with the platyrrhines, they have a higher level of sexual dimorphism. So remembering sexual dimorphism is referring to differences in overall body size between males and females of the same species. It can also look at differences in physical characteristics, such as sexually dimorphic canines or a sagittal crest we'll talk about later. And remember that this physical feature of sexual dimorphism is also related to competition. So typically primate groups that have higher levels of sexual dimorphism will be more competitive. So in general, the Cercopithecoids are more competitive for access to resources, food, and mates in comparison with the platyrrhines. They do have a feature called the bony ear tube. Their molars are bilophodont. So bi means 2, dont means teeth. So if you're looking at their molars, the 3 teeth that are in the back of their mouth, their molars are bilophodont. Their thorax or mid-region is relatively narrow. Many Cercopithecoids do have a tail, but it is not prehensile, meaning that it does not have a grasping ability like you see in the platyrrhines. They have a feature on their rear end called the ischial callocytes. So that's kind of a fancy way of saying tough sitting pads on the rear, or butt pads. And the Cercopithecoids are among the most diverse and successful of the non-human primates. All right, so you can see a picture of the ischial callocytes here. Sometimes if you see a baboon at the zoo or other Old World monkeys, you see this kind of red-looking rear end. And you sometimes see a red rear end if you're looking at a female primate that's an estrus that's going through her cycle. But the ischial callocytes are found in both males and females of the Cercopithecoids. So this is an adaptation that allows them to be more successful at being terrestrial, at living on the ground. Because as you can imagine, many of these primates live in very hot regions in Africa and Southeast Asia. So sitting on the ground for long periods of time can be uncomfortable. So they have these kind of built-in butt pads. They are among the most diverse and successful of the non-human primates and have high levels of sexual dimorphism, meaning that the males in general are much larger than the females. All right, so one of the easiest ways to determine New World versus Old World, or platyrrhine versus Cercopithecoid, is to look at the dental formula, especially if you've got the dentition, if you've got the jaw or the mandible. So the biggest difference in New World monkeys have an extra premolar. So they have 2 incisors, 1 canine, 3 premolars, and 3 molars. Whereas the Old World monkeys, and that's something that they share with the apes and humans, they have 1 less premolar. So counting from the front of the mouth, you have 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, and 3 molars. All right, let's talk about superfamily Homonoidia. So again, envision our chart. We're looking under catarrhines right now. So underneath catarrhines, the 2 main divisions are the cercopithecoids, the Old World monkeys that we just talked about, and now we're going to talk about Homonoidia or hominoids, which are the apes and humans. They generally have the largest body size as well as the largest relative brain size. In the apes, the lesser apes and the greater apes, their arms are relatively longer than their legs because they use a form of locomotion called brachiation. They're using their arms to swing through tree branches. They generally have more complex brain and enhanced cognitive abilities. They have increased periods of infant development and dependency. They have high levels of parental investment. Their molar pattern is Y5, and they lack a tail completely. The lesser apes are the gibbons and the siamangs. They are among the most skilled brachiators. So they're using, if you notice in these pictures, their arms are much longer than their legs. So they're using their arms to swing through branches. They have extremely long arms. They have curved phalanges or finger bones, which again is enhancing their ability to hang in the tree. And they have a very powerful pectoral girdle and shoulder muscles. And they're one of the only primate species that has been observed to practice monogamy. But generally the type of monogamy that they practice is what we call serial monogamy, meaning they have a series of monogamous relationships over their reproductive lives. All right, the great apes, the 4 big ones, orangutans, chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas. Some of the unique features that you see in the greater apes is a feature called the sagittal crest in male gorillas and orangutans. I'll show you a picture of this here in a moment. And chimpanzees, along with humans, eat a diet that we call omnivorous, meaning that they eat a wide variety of foliage, fruits, insects, nuts, and a little bit of meat. And humans are unique because they are characterized by a skeletal structure that allows for effective bipedal locomotion. And again, more to come on that in future chapters. All right, so let's talk about the orangutans first. So the word orangutan means wise man of the forest, and natural habitats are found exclusively in Borneo and Sumatra in Southeast Asia. They are predominantly arboreal, predominantly tree dwelling, and they eat predominantly fruit, so they're mainly frugivorous. They do have very high levels of sexual dimorphism. Males on average are around 200 pounds and females generally are less than 100. So males are double the size of females. And unfortunately they are severely threatened due to poaching, habitat loss, the palm oil trade, coffee cultivation, and wood pulp. All right, gorillas. There's different species of gorillas. There's western lowland gorillas, eastern lowland gorillas, and mountain gorillas. They're found in the forests of equatorial Africa, and they are the largest of all of the living primates. They also have extremely high levels of sexual dimorphism. Males are generally around 400 pounds, and females are somewhere between 150 and 200 pounds. Their mating structure, they live in harems. They live in one male, multi-female groups. And the harem master, essentially that dominant male, is then mating with all of the reproductively receptive females in that group. And they are predominantly vegetarian, which is going to relate to their massive jaws and dentition and the sagittal crest that I'll show you here more in a moment. They are also, unfortunately, extremely endangered. There's only about 125,000 western lowland gorillas left in the DRC. Only about 12,000 eastern lowland gorillas, and only about 700 mountain gorillas left in Rwanda, the DRC, and Uganda. Chimpanzees anatomically are very similar to gorillas. However, behaviorally, they are very different from gorillas. They're far more arboreal than the gorillas. They're less sexually dimorphic than the gorillas and the orangutans. As far as locomotion goes, they have the widest variety of locomotion. They can be terrestrial quadrupeds, meaning they're moving around on all fours on the ground. They can be brachiators, meaning that they're using their forelimbs, their arms, to swing from branch to branch. And they can also be bipedal for short periods of time. But thinking about last time you were at the zoo, if you think about a chimpanzee walking bipedally, it doesn't look quite as graceful as it does when a human walks bipedally. And generally, it's because they're carrying something. They're either carrying food or tools or infants. So they have very limited bipedalism. They're omnivorous, meaning that they eat a wide variety of foliage, fruit, insects, nuts, and some meat. And chimpanzees they have demonstrated hunting and meat sharing behaviors in the wild. And that's generally related to bonding amongst males. And it's generally the higher ranking males that are the best hunters. And they also control access to the meat. They share the meat with their alliances. So that's part of their alliance formation. So many of the male chimpanzees, that's how they form their alliances, which is then beneficial in other aspects when they're protecting the group. Group size can vary from 10 to 100 individuals, and they live in multi-male, multi-female groups. All right, bonobos were once thought to be just smaller versions of chimpanzees or pygmy chimpanzees, but further studies have shown that bonobos are not actually that much smaller. They're slightly more gracile in their bone structure, but overall they're not dramatically smaller than the common chimpanzee. Bonobos are far more arboreal than the chimps. And their social structure is designed quite differently. Chimpanzees can be fairly brutal with one another, whereas bonobos tend to be much more peaceful, and they negotiate their hierarchies through copulations and frequent sexual encounters. So these copulations are frequent and occur outside of the female's estrus cycle. So they're essentially using sex for reasons other than just reproduction. They often use these sexual encounters to diffuse tensions and negotiate the dominance hierarchies within the group. Same-sex pairings are also common. And among the bonobos, the females are actually usually dominant. So we're going to talk a lot more about chimpanzees versus bonobos in our next chapter when we look at behavior. All right, so this is that feature called the sagittal crest that I was telling you guys about earlier. So the sagittal crest is found in male gorillas and male orangutans. So I also like to call it the bony mohawk. So it's this ridge or protrusion of bone that's going down the sagittal suture. The sagittal suture is a suture that separates the two parietal bones. So you've got the parietal, there's a parietal here and one on the other side, and then the occipital's in the back. So that sagittal suture runs down the center here. So that's why it's called the sagittal crest. It's the bony mohawk that runs down the sagittal suture. So the function for that, it's the attachment point for the temporalis muscle, which is the jaw muscle. So in a gorilla, the jaw muscle starts all the way down here at the ramus, tucks underneath the zygomatic bone, the cheekbone, and then attaches all the way up here at the top at the sagittal crest. So if you remember from our previous slide, gorillas are predominantly vegetarian. They're the most vegetarian of all the primates. So when you think about eating a salad that has, raw lettuce or spinach and cucumbers and carrots, and, if you think about chewing a salad versus chewing other things like fruit or even meat, it actually takes a lot more chewing force, a lot more crushing and grinding to break up the cellulose in plants. And gorillas also have an extremely large body size, with males being 400 pounds, females being around 200. So you can imagine if they're only eating vegetation, they have to eat a lot of it. Gorillas spend about 50% of their waking hours just chewing on veggies. So the reason they have these really powerful jaws, large dentition, especially the premolars and molars, and the sagittal crest is due predominantly to their diet. But it's also somewhat related to sexual dimorphism. You see a much more prominent sagittal crest in a male gorilla. Sometimes females have a very slight sagittal crest, but it is much more predominant in the males. All right. So one of the big differences that separates us from the apes. So apes are pongids, humans are hominids or hominins. So the main difference will be our form of locomotion, and we'll go far more in detail with this in future chapters. But some of the big differences that I want to point out: chimpanzees are predominantly quadrupedal, so they're going to have a C-shaped curvature to their vertebral column. Their rib cage is much more broad. They have a pelvis that overall is longer and more narrow, and the iliac blades are going to flare outwards to the side. They have a femur, a thigh bone that is much straighter and shorter, and they have retained the opposable hallux, the big toe. And then in comparison, Humans and our ancestors are more adapted to bipedal locomotion. So you're going to see an S-shaped curvature to the spinal column, the vertebral column. The rib cage is more narrow. The pelvis overall is shorter and broader and kind of bowl-shaped. The iliac blades are going to form this kind of bowl shape. And the femur is longer and angled inward towards the knee. And there's a feature on the back called the linea aspera that will be important for the attachment point for the muscles that are required for bipedal locomotion. And we have lost the opposable hallux. We have a hallux that is in line with the rest of our toes. So much more in that to come, but just a little preview on quadrupedalism versus bipedalism. And remember, chimpanzees also have retained some of that ability to brachiate. So in comparison, a chimpanzee's arms are going to be much longer than a human's arms because they're using their arms to locomote in the trees. They also have longer curved phalanges, finger bones, whereas humans, we are adapted for more sophisticated tool use and production. So we have a shorter, thicker thumb, and we have shorter phalanges, shorter finger bones. All right, so that is it for the PowerPoint presentation on primate classification. Just as a friendly reminder, there's a summary of all of the key terminology at the end of every PowerPoint. So if you're looking for a quick summary of key terms, key terminology that's important for each chapter, these are always located at the end of the PowerPoint.